Hi, I'm Meghana,
I'm Sahana,
and this is Shankari.
our co-host and co-producer, and today we're going to be discussing the book, The Greatest Telugu Stories Ever Told.
And so this book was selected and translated by Dasu Krishnamoorty and Tamraparni Dasu.
Both of us are Tamil, in case you can't tell, but we were still able to understand this book fully, as the English it was translated into was very easy to read, and it was well translated.
Yeah.
And it's overall a really good story collection that you guys should check out. And right now we're going to talk about why. So we're going to be talking about 3 stories from this collection.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about Adventure by Kodavatti Ganti Kutumbarao, An Ideal Man by Adapalli Prabhu, and Eye Opener by Chodivulla Babu. So those are 3 stories that we felt like don't really summarize this collection, but 3 stories we highly enjoyed from this collection.
Yeah.
And basically are very different in their motifs and beliefs.
All right. So the first story we wanted to discuss was Adventure.
So Adventure follows, it's basically a very hilarious, humorous story. I laughed like several times while reading it. It's really lighthearted and doesn't like take itself too seriously. So this story is essentially a case of like mistaken identity, I guess. So it starts out with this girl named Raja Lakshmi. She goes by Lakshmi, and she's making papadam in her house with her family. She's not making anything. She's eating everything, okay? She has a very mischievous personality, and she ends up getting a letter sent to her house. So she opens a letter, and it says, "Dear Rajam," and her name is Raja Lakshmi. And she's like, okay, like this is weird. Like, why am I getting this letter? And in the letter, it's this very romantic letter that's like, oh my gosh, like I can't live without you. You're the one reason that I'm alive. Like these letters are my sustenance and all of this kind of stuff, right? So then she's like, okay, this is super weird. Like I don't know anyone like this. And she realizes like, okay, maybe this letter wasn't meant for me. Maybe it was meant for like somebody else named Raja Lakshmi who lived in this house. And it was meant for the previous owner's like daughter, I think, who was also named Raja Lakshmi and wrote by Raja, not Lakshmi. So she ends up getting like the guy sends another letter because he gets no response, and it's like, Rajam, why haven't you responded to me? It's been too long since your last reply. And she's like, okay, weirdo, like let's hold up right here. And she almost writes a response to him, but then she's like, what am I doing? And she rips it up, and he doesn't write back for 3 months. So she kind of gets like a little jealous because she's like, oh, well, he keeps addressing this Rajam in his letters, but it's never me. But she doesn't want to admit that. So it turns out that the Rajam in his letters is actually getting married. And Lakshmi thinks it'd be really funny if she packaged the wedding invitation in an envelope and sent it to his address, because just for like shock value and a little joke. So she does that. And his brother ends up writing her response, and she opens a letter in a park.
Yeah.
And the response is just, "Dear Lakshmi," and says, "Lakshmi, devil incarnate," right? And he's like, "Thank you so much for the invitation. You ended up giving my brother 102-degree fever, and he is passed out on the floor." And she's like, oh my god, like what if I actually harmed him? Like what if he's like dead or something? Or like what if he's like seriously hurt? I need to check what's going on so that I don't get in trouble. So she ends up basically like under the excuse of like visiting her sister who lives in the same town as the guy Rangarao. She ends up going to Rangarao's house just to see if he's okay. He comes out, she meets his brother, and he's actually such a really handsome guy. Like even when he's sick, she's like, he's super fine, you know. And then it turns out like a couple of days later, Rangarao shows up at her house like unannounced, and he's like, the only girl that I'll ever marry is Lakshmi. And she's like, okay, what the heck? And he's like, because she visited me when I was at 102-degree fever. She visited from all the way up from over here. Like, wow, such commitment, such devotion. She's like, bro, like I shouldn't tell him that it was me who gave him the 102-degree fever in the first place. Okay.
Yeah.
So she basically like keeps quiet, and they go through with the wedding. Like one thing I really liked about the story is that there's no like real meaning to it. It's kind of just like a fun like go with the flow, like take you along for the ride kind of story with like dramatic characters in a dramatic setting.
It's just about young lovers, an unexpected like a little plot element of both of them having the same name, Raja Lakshmi, and it's just such a lighthearted and fun story that I genuinely really enjoyed reading.
Yeah, and it's so funny. Like honestly, one of the funniest things I've ever read. It just especially when he got the 102-degree fever, I started laughing out loud.
And then another book we wanted to discuss was the book An Ideal Man, and this one takes a little heavier of a tone, but it still conveys a lot. It conveys a lot of meaning, unlike the first story. I think both of them were written for different purposes, and both of them serve their purposes really well. So An Ideal Man is essentially about this guy who thinks that he's super educated, and he is educated in the sense that he's gone to like a lot of schooling, he has a really high paying job, etc. So for some purposes, he has to cross the Godavari River. And So happens, like on the day he's about to cross the river, there's a very heavy rain and the Godavari is flooding. So he's like, I don't know where to stay because there's no inns or anything on his side of the river. This fisherman comes by and he's like, okay, you can stay at my place. Like, I don't mind. So the main character goes and stays at this fisherman's place, and he really just does not see it as like a great place to be. He's like, this house is so thatched, it's so rural. Like there's this fisherman's son is just running around. It's just very like not classy or sophisticated as he would have it. And he therefore is just like, oh, these people have no goals, they don't have ambitions like they should have.
Yeah, at one point he even like refers to them as like animals. He's like, all they do is like live, eat, and sleep. They don't have any like higher purpose. Like they don't know who Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein is, so they
Yeah.
can't be like educated at all.
Yeah. So then the main character is just like, oh, where does your son go to school? He's just making small talk with the fisherman. The fisherman's like, oh, my son doesn't go to school. He doesn't need any of that stuff. And the main character is like, oh, wait, really? But don't you need to go to school to like be smart and everything? Like my son goes to school and he can name all of the U.S. presidents. And the fisherman's like, no, my son is also smart because he can name all of the fish that live in the Ganga.
In the
So
Godavari.
in the Godavari. I'm sorry, my bad. You can name all the fish that can live on the Godavari, and then he tells his son to start naming the fish. And while his son is naming the fish, the main character is like, "Oh my gosh, like this is so useless." But later, the main character is thinking about it, and he's like, "What is more useful? This fisherman's son who can name all the fish in the Godavari, or my son who just knows how to name the U.S. presidents as some like general rule? What is actually more practically useful?" So he thinks about that for a little bit. The night passes, morning comes, and the main character is leaving to cross the Godavari once and for all. He tries to pay the fisherman for letting him stay at his house, right? But then the fisherman's like, no, it's nothing I need to be paid for. It's like the most human thing you can do. Just have empathy for your fellow man. Let him stay at your house. If I had been standing outside your house in those same circumstances, what would you have done? And the main character, and the fisherman walks away, and the main character is just left thinking about it. He's unable to say anything because he's very ashamed of how he would have actually answered.
Yeah, I think it actually changes your definition of like what education really is. Education isn't just like about reading the most books you can read or naming all the U.S. presidents. It's kind of like education. The highest form of education depends on where you are, and like for the fisherman, it's learning about all the fish in the water, and so that he can make his own livelihood. And so for his son can survive in that environment. And maybe for somebody else it's something different.
Yeah, and it also tells you like what is being a good person. Is it like having being really smart, just like being able to name all the US presidents? Is it having a high paying job? Is it having a good education? Or is it being able to offer food, water, and shelter to a stranger who happens to be in a stick of trouble? Like, what is real kindness? And then the third story we wanted to talk about was
Eye opener. So this one was about, we know that on this channel we've discussed a lot of parent-child relationships from the child's perspective, but here we're discussing kind of like a relationship from the dad's perspective. So there's his grandfather, and he's living with his son. And to him, his son is like the greatest person in the world, like at least at the beginning, because his son has a job and he's making money and it's enough to support his family. And there's this guy who lives on the street named Anant. And Anant every day will get on his motorcycle, look around, looking all posh, and the grandfather's like, come on, doesn't he have anything better to do? Like, my son is so much greater than him because he actually has a job instead of this loafer. His son doesn't treat him very well, though. His son and his wife treat him very poorly. He's not given toothpaste to brush his teeth, so when he gets a toothache, they refuse to get him to the doctor because they say it's going to cost money. He's not allowed to touch his grandchildren in fear of giving them an infection. So he's basically like living a completely isolated life. He's sad. He's so sad that his son looks forward to watching the TV every day instead of actually conversing and talking with him. He misses out on like all of these moments, okay? And so then the book takes you through this like one man's journey, and like essentially one day his son's like, hey, like, can I'll tell you something. My wife says like, oh, she's gonna go to work, so you'll be alone in the house, and because of that we want to put you in a nursing home. And the dad is so shocked by this.
Yeah, the grandfather's like that was the bare minimum. He thought his son would keep him in his house, but it turns out his son thinks of him as nothing more than like dead weight, and he'd rather him leave. So then the grandfather leaves the house. He gets on an auto, and the auto driver's like, "Where'd you want to go?" And he's like, "Do you know any like elderly age? Do you know any ashrams nearby?" And the auto driver's like, "There's two. There's one if you have a lot of money, if you are like wealthy and you want good service, and then for the poor, the young, and the old, there's Vishwapuram." He's like, "Take me to Vishwapuram." And he goes to Vishwapuram. He goes to this ashram, and in it, there's a lot of like old people and very young people.
Mhm.
And these people aren't people who have like a real purpose to your lives. Is if you compare them to like a young man who would have like a job, etc., etc. These people have kind of finished their purpose or haven't even started it yet. But somehow they're all living in harmony, and it's very like peaceful and harmonious. And he's never felt like this before. And he picks up a newspaper clipping, and on the clipping, there's two old men. It's like a story about two old men. One of them is dead at a bus stop, and the other one is also at the bus stop, and he's like barely alive. And the grandfather is like, "Oh man, I hope somebody saves this old man." And then something shows up on the TV, and
On the
it's
newspaper.
on the newspaper, not bad. And it's like Mr. Anand has saved this old man, and he's actually staying with him at the hospital, and he's taking care of this old man. And later, Anand shows at Vishwapuram with the old man, gently guiding him, taking him into the nursing home, not nursing home, taking him into Vishwapuram with care. And the main character is just thinking about this. He's just like, how could I like judge Anant after just seeing what he was like on the surface?
Yeah,
Even though my own son, like his own son, like offered these platitudes of like, "Oh, we just want you to not be lonely. We want you to be with other people." When they like were trying to kick him out of their house,
yeah, it's like
Anant and Anant had always just glared at him whenever he crossed the street and everything. Anant was the person who actually took care of so many people's grandparents, not only his own, while his own son couldn't even take care of him. So he ends up giving his land to Anant.
For
and
context,
Vishwapuram.
Anant is the founder of Vishwapuram.
Yeah, and he ends up giving his land to Anant and Vishwapuram. So that is that story. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, like, okay, I definitely thought, like, when I was reading the story, kind of like, don't judge somebody by their first appearance, and like, don't just judge somebody by like how they look, because like words aren't what they seem. Your actions really prove who you are. And
Yeah.
Anant may look like kind of like this emo biker dude on the surface, but he's not. He's like, or he's much more than that, really. He's kind of like the founder of this place that's able to like look after people who the society sees as their purpose has expired, but they really haven't yet. Their purpose is like just to find happiness, which you're doing in everyday life thanks to Anant.
Yeah.
And that's why it's called Eye Opener, because like I remember the last line of his story when he goes to Anant, he's like, "I want you to have all my money and property because I want to experience some of the happiness that you feel when you're able to give these people what they deserve."
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, he's like, "I can finally see the golden light through my eyes," because he was finally able to grasp, like, this is what kind of life is all about. It's so much more than just like working a job or, like being able to support a family. It's like kind of just like being there for people and being a shoulder to lean on, even if you're not related to them or even if you have like seemingly no connection to them.
So overall, this book was a very good book.
It is a banger book.
The stories we've given you were just a couple of examples of the stories in this book, and if you're interested in it, I definitely recommend checking it out. It was a real doozy, a real eye-opener, dare I say.
Yeah, okay, so she's done. But it was just like, this isn't even like scratching the surface of what this book covers. Like, honestly, there's stories in this book for more mature audiences and for stuff that can be enjoyed by all, but they all have like a different meaning. They're all bringing like a different flavor to the table, so that when you like taste this book, I guess you're getting like so much stuff from it. It's not just like one type of story, one type of way. And I think that just represents the diversity of this language and how much we can interpret it, which is like, I have to say, it's been like very marvelously translated, because I'm able to like feel all these emotions in English, which only a good translation can make you do.
Yeah, so definitely recommend giving this a read if you can. And yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching. Bye.
Bye.